I'm all set, Dylan.
All right. Okay, so welcome everybody to our very first Nerds of a Feather chat. So I am, I guess, your host this evening, one of them. My name is Dylan. I'm the field ecologist and entomologist with the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. And I will let my other two panelists introduce themselves.
Go ahead,
Steve?
Dr. Campbell.
Steve Campbell, I'm conservation biologist. Can you say what else? What?
Sure, what do you do?
What? Dylan didn't introduce herself in that way. I was following her lead. She's the leader.
Okay, well, in that case, then let me introduce myself, because I think everybody here already. My name is Neil Gifford. I'm the conservation director for the preserve, and I get to do a little bit of everything and work with these two fabulous people to study and better understand the system and evaluate the impact of our management, so we know if we're actually moving things into a healthier state.
Awesome. Thank you. So we are here tonight, guys, to answer your questions, things that have been on your mind that you have been wanting to ask. It can be anything. I especially appreciate questions about bees or insects in general. If you, you can type your questions into the chat box, or you can put them into the Q&A. We didn't receive any questions on our form site, so we'll be taking live questions tonight. My email address, I'll put it in the chat box in case somebody wants to send, email me something, like if you have a photo you need identified or something. Yeah.
We could talk about fire ecology, ecological management, ecological restoration, field ornithology, lupin, endangered corner blue, the current status of the frosted elfin, which is potentially going to be listed federally.
Oh, do I do caterpillars, Kim? Sure, I'll give it a shot. We did just see today. I was out with my seasonal team and our science education specialist, and we saw some freshly hatched buck moths. I've never seen them so freshly hatched. They were still a little light colored and right on top of the egg case. So that was pretty exciting.
So, Dylan, tell me about the whippoorwills you heard, or that was heard, woodcock.
Yeah, Mary emailed me. She's one of our she's one of our community scientists, and she's serving for American woodcock over in Great Dune. And she said that she heard whippoorwill at four different points in Great Dune. So
that's
exciting. Oh, Susan asked us a question. Susan said, what is the difference between native lupin and nursery lupin? If there is a difference, where do we get the native?
Ooh. So do you want me to hit the difference between the two?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the native lupin is Lupinus perennis, and the garden lupin or nursery lupin, or the stuff that's all along the roadsides and is actually invasive in Maine and New Hampshire, is a Russell's hybrid lupin. That's frequently the one that people grow in their gardens. So the main difference is that the Russell's hybrid, the nursery lupin, is much bigger and will do really well in actually more richer sites. The leaves are bigger, the leaflets are longer, the flower stalks on the nursery lupin will get to be close to half a meter tall. I've seen them. They get pretty big. They last a while. The native lupin that you can see behind me and behind Dylan in bloom is at most maybe 18 inches tall, 20 inches tall, and really only grows in the driest, most open sunny sites like pine barrens and oak savannas in the upper Midwest. I don't know where native lupin is commercially available. know there are some nurseries that were carrying it, but I don't know if they currently have any. That's a good question that we could actually ask our botanist, Jesse Hoffman, works with their native seeds in the nurseries, and he might know.
Now I'm trying to think.
It's a double-edged sword with the native lupin, and that it's, of course, it's beautiful. But also, if you live close to the preserve and you plant native lupin and you get cardinal blue butterflies, you now have a native species habitat on your property. So we have been very cautious about encouraging folks that are too close to the preserve to plant native lupin, because you might just end up with cardinal blues in your garden, which would be fantastic, but it can come with some strain.
All right, cool. Thanks, Neil. Wendy informed me, guys, that if you have photos, you can upload the photos into the chat too. So if you do have a photo for ID. Let's see. Susan says, I was out in the back area of the Carnarvon section near those wetlands and saw a big X of aluminum fence, maybe 1 foot high, just at the edge of the woods. Looks science-y. Can you explain it? Do you want to take that, Steve?
I didn't hear the question. I was working on another one that popped up.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you should take that one.
Do you know what they are?
I don't know. You want to take it? You want to take it, Neil?
Yeah, so that is very sciencey. Those are actually traps for reptiles and amphibians, principally amphibians, frogs, toads, salamanders, and that's all part of the city of Albany's landfill expansion and their habitat restoration project on the east side of the Yellow Trail back there by the landfill. That former mobile home park has been restored to a really nice suite of both upland and wetland communities. One of the things that AES is doing, Applied Ecological Services, that works for the city, they're a ecological consulting firm out of Wisconsin who specializes on wetlands and oak savanna and barrens. So they have established a whole host of monitoring sites across the area they've restored for monitoring how the wildlife responds to the management they're doing out there. And one of the things they're doing are those metal X's actually have a 5-gallon bucket buried in the sand at the end of them. So when a snake, a reptile, a turtle, turtles work less, salamanders, frogs, when they when they're walking along and they hit that barrier of that aluminum fence, they'll follow that until they fall into the bucket. And the buckets are opened at night and checked frequently over the course of the night and the next morning. And animals are then inventoried and released unharmed. That's principally, it's called a pitfall trap array for reptiles and amphibians.
Awesome. Steve, what one were you looking at? Were you looking at Scott and Denise?
Yeah, they're asking if they were if the Carners were late this year, and it looks like when did you first see them, Dylan? You saw them last
13th.
The 13th. So no, if anything, they're early. I mean, they always vary from year to year, and we never know exactly when the first one pops. We only know the first one that we've seen, but the models that we did, I fit insect population curves to the broods to come up with an estimate of when they come out, and our start date is 15th of May is when they come out. But we've had some as early as, again, these are estimated because it's modeled, as early as the 3rd of May to as late as the 21st of May. So they're pretty close to an average this year, but they do run from season to season. They can go earlier or later depending on how the spring is going.
Great question, Janelle.
Yeah, why are the lupin plants so hard to grow? We're trying to figure that out too.
I was looking at Janelle's question. I don't know if you can see that, Dylan.
Oh, was it not why are the lupin plants so hard to grow?
No, she's asking about following the pitfall trap conversation. Is there a way to tag salamanders and anurans without toe clipping?
Elastomer?
Yeah, so you can do pit tags on some of the bigger ones, but I know with salamanders, sometimes they take a clip for genetic work of the very tip of the tail, but is there a way to tag salamanders?
Elastomers.
Yeah, you inject
I've seen it done as in tiny as like recently metamorphed wood frogs. I've seen them injected. You take like a hypodermic needle with some basically it's like a plastic elastomer that you just inject a little bit under their skin just to give them like a little dot of color, sometimes multiple colors, and then usually you hit it with a black light and it radiates, and you can do that. I haven't seen it used a lot, but that's one way to do it. But yeah, we've really mostly moved away from toe clipping, even though some of the salamanders can regrow their toes. It's usually, for animal welfare reasons, we don't really do that kind of marking anymore.
Do they still do shake and bake? Used to be able to shake.
I've seen it for the frogs. I've seen it for frogs. That's more for tracking as opposed to like mark recapture. Right. You can shake and bake and track.
You've got to explain shake and bake frogs. What are you talking about?
That's when you put them in a bag with some like phosphorescent powder that glows under black light. So you kind of put them in there and shake it like you would put chicken in a bag for shake and bake. So you kind of coat them and then you let them go, and then you can use a black light to follow where they went.
That makes bird banding sound really humane.
Yeah, I've done that with small mammals, and I've seen people do it with frogs. I thought there was more of an issue with frogs because they breathe through their skin, so covering them with a phosphorescent powder. I'm not sure how much that's done anymore either, but
yeah,
a lot of this you don't have to now. You can put devices on a lot of these animals that you couldn't even 10 or 15 years ago.
And people are putting external trackers on, at least the spadefoot toads down in the Cape.
So Janelle did ask, why are the lupins so hard to grow? It was an earlier question. Neil should probably take this one too, because you've been trying to grow it for a lot longer than I have.
Yeah, and if you look at what's behind Dylan and what's behind me, you can hit the jackpot and really get lupin to do exceptionally well. But in a garden setting, I've had a terrible time at home. I've never had plants live more than a couple of years before they end up just never showing up again. Lupin is naturally distributed in a very patchy form. There's a former 4-acre parking lot on Apollo Drive, and the first restoration site that I was charged with restoring when I started here in '96 was this paved parking lot that TNC purchased. So we ripped up the blacktop with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the gravel underneath, and we're literally planting lupin in rows, evenly spaced seeds. We made rows with council rake, a hoe-like rake that we use for fire. So in the sand, we made these even rows, distributed all the seeds evenly across 4 acres, all else being equal. It all looked exactly the same. The soil tests were the same, and still lupin grew well in some spots and other spots, not at all. I have no idea what that's about. Lupin is a legume, so it does depend on soil bacteria, soil fungi to help it fix nitrogen. And I don't know if there are soil properties that limit its ability to get that symbiosis going. But yeah, it's $1 million question. So our solution to that, Janelle, was to think like lupin. Lupin is a long-lived perennial in the right conditions, producing hundreds of seeds a year. The only reason a plant would do that is that most of those seedlings are going to die. So it's kind of like an R-selected plant, if you think about it from that perspective, if you think about your basic ecology classes. So we started just distributing a ridiculous amount of seed into restoration sites. And that's how so what you see behind me, that was seeded at 3 pounds of lupin seed per acre. And some spots you hit the jackpot, it does really well. Some spots you plant 3 times and nothing happens. Still don't know why. Thankfully, it works across enough.
All right, Kim, I got your photographs. They look a little bit like, I'm not super good with the moth caterpillars. They look like they're probably moths to me. So they're kind of saying noctuid to me, which is a fairly common family of moths. And it's a very large group of moths. So try maybe looking up some noctuids. It's I'll put it in the chat, the family, because they don't really, I can't remember the Can
we see the picture, Dylan, or no?
Yeah, I can share it. Let me share. So she's shared 3 different ones. This was one of them.
Oh yeah, that's a noctuid.
And this one, this one's a really early instar. It's harder to tell when they're younger.
Yeah.
And then this one with that prominent white line I feel like I've seen that one before, but
Tim McCabe might know, and if those caterpillars are on the plants that she found them on, that could also potentially help in their identification. Because many species are somewhat specific, and especially in where they lay their eggs. These look like they're all on aspen.
Yeah, they do look like they're on aspen.
I can label that. I can identify the tree. It's a big tree.
Let's see. Okay. So then Susan said, please tell me all about the frosted elfin. I love photographing them, but they are challenging. So Susan, the frosted elfins come out in like late April to early May. So we're kind of probably on the tail end of the adults flight season for them. I agree that if it's really warm out, they get supercharged and they spook easy. But a lot of times you can see them right on the trails, and I've experienced the males more so on the trails and the females kind of off trail on the Lupin. So if you're on the trails, it's probably males. And the reason they spook easy is because they're being very territorial. So you'll frequently see them encounter another elfin and they do this like spin straight up into the air and then they disappear. So I would suggest for them trying to go out in the morning when it's a little bit cooler, because I do find that when it's warm enough and they're kind of supercharged. So all insects need to reach a certain body temperature before they can fly. So if you've ever seen like bumblebees or moths kind of sit and shiver their wings, what they're doing is warming up their flight muscles so that they can fly. So if you go when it's cooler, then they're not super ready to fly yet. So that might be your best bet to try and get photographs of them. And they are also a lupin feeder like the Carner blue butterfly, but we don't seem to see them in huge numbers like we do with the Carners, but we seem to see them kind of everywhere. So they seem to be able to persist with only like a few lupin plants, but never reach high numbers, whereas Carners seem to need more lupin plants and then can reach pretty high numbers. So they are also...
And their strategy is totally different. I mean, they only have one brood a year. They overwinter as pupa, not as eggs. They seem to persist a lot longer at even really small lupin sites.
We are assisting right now. The Fish and Wildlife Service is evaluating them for federal listing. So we're assisting with some work right now to make that determination. It'll probably be another few years before they decide.
Are they going for threatened or endangered? You know,
They don't, I don't think they know until they get the data.
Okay, I wasn't sure if they.
Yeah, and Dylan's being incredibly modest. She is one of the leads in the world of frosted elfin, because the pine bush. Not only does the pine bush have one of the best populations of elfins, people think, but also Dylan's entomology skills are bar none. So she's been out surveying and collecting as part of a nationwide genetics project to help identify if there's actually one elfin or are there multiple species of frosted elfin.
Looks like we got a bee question. Yes. Susan says, we live very close to the preserve and are trying to ID a large insect. Looks like a fat bumblebee, but is all black, hovering on fast, short wings outside our porch for days. Looks to be chasing away others. It is not hummingbird moth. I know those. So Susan, you probably have a male carpenter bee. They are also territorial. They'll kind of stake out an area where they think that female bees are going to come out because they want to grab them and mate them with them. So they're going to try and chase away any other male carpenter bees that are there. If you look closely, you might be able to see a little yellow on their face. So that helps you know that it's a male. The females do not have that yellow face. They just have a black face. So given that behavior and the fact that they're near your porch or you said your porch. So they do nest in wood. So they're frequent visitors to porches and decks and playgrounds and fence posts and everything. So I suspect that's what you have. Let's see, Steve, do you want one? You haven't had one in a bit.
If it's up my alley, I'm not going to identify any bees.
Do you want to talk about the importance and utility of the controlled burns?
No, Neil can wax eloquently about that better than I can. That's
Well, what, so much to say.
how
about
much time do you
controlled
have?
burns. Yeah. Denise, be careful what you ask for. So the importance and utility. So in a nutshell, I like to tell people that fire in pine barrens is much like hydrology in a wetland. It really drives the ecosystem. So the same way that in a wetland, hydrology is influencing moisture levels, plant species and animal species composition, nutrient cycling, fire is doing similar things invisibly. Well, I guess it's pretty visible, right, when it burns. Preparing and maintaining the ecosystem to be able to support the plants and animals that are characteristic of pine barrens, especially the rare ones. So fire is kind of instant decomposition. The plants have lots of different plants have many different adaptations that not only allow them to tolerate fire, but also benefit from fire. And other thing about fire in pine barrens, they will eventually burn. So it's all a matter of the utility of controlled burns really gets into trying to burn these sites that are inevitably going to burn anyway under conditions we choose versus conditions that nature chooses, because nature tends to burn when things are going to burn pretty extreme. So really dry drought conditions, fires that can be very difficult to put out. So as much as we burn in the pine barrens for the ecological effects that we want, the fire effects like to create habitat, that's what's behind me for lupin and coners and prairie warblers and frosted elfins. We're also burning to keep the fuel loading low, so keep the amount of burnable material at a low, manageable level. So not only is it easier for us to burn, but if and when we do get a wildfire, and we've had several in the 24 years that I've been here, all of them relatively small and pretty quickly put out because they were in areas that we had been doing controlled or prescribed fire. So by burning periodically, we're not only benefiting the rare ecology and habitat for a bunch of rare plant and animal species, but we're also minimizing the risk of uncontrollable wildfire, which is critically important in this landscape because it's so heavily urban, right? So we have, or suburban, but there's an awful lot of development within and around the edges of the preserve that we want to protect not only from fire, but also from the effects of smoke.
Awesome.
Is that eloquent enough?
I think that was shorter than we all
That
thought.
was well shorter than I've seen you. So yes, we're going to go with eloquent.
All right, Dylan asks, is there evidence that animals move between the north and south sections of the preserve? If not, could something like wildlife bridging or tunnels be used with I-90 to increase connectivity? That's a good question. And that's one of our pipe dreams.
Well, I mean, in terms of evidence, we don't have like direct, I mean, except for some birds that we've recaptured. In terms of having marked individuals that we've known to cross, we only know that from a few, from some of our birds that we've banded. Otherwise, it's really hard to tell how much movement is going on. You know, probably we can just say that some of the mammals, larger mammals and stuff are crossing, but that's probably, those are sort of educated guesses. We don't really have evidence of that. But in terms of the tunnels and the what are they called? The earth bridges. Yeah.
Overpasses. Wildlife overpass.
Yeah, we would love that, but I don't know. I've thought about it a little bit for the underpasses for some of the spotted turtle work that we've had have shown that they do get nicked, hit by cars crossing. So could they help in those situations with some of those drift fences? If you can put drift fences up to kind of corral them into certain tunnels, maybe. I'm not super familiar with that research, but I know that's been done to look at turtle crossings for roads.
They're used pretty extensively, the wildlife overpasses in Canada and Europe with great success. And it's the kind of thing we floated the idea with the Thruway Authority years ago. So it's kind of on someday if the Thruway ever needed a major overhaul, we hope that they will work with us because there are some spots that would be pretty conducive to bridging the Thruway. But
what do you think the price tag on that is?
Yeah, very high, very high.
Yeah.
But to Dylan's point, I think he hit on what is ultimately the biggest long-term obstacle to our ability to create and manage a truly viable pine barrens is fragmentation. In particular, the roads, the landfill development. So the degree to which, projects like the landfill restoration project, or putting in wildlife overpasses or underpasses to help literally bridge some of those connections, would be a tremendous asset to our ability to manage viable populations of some of these species. We think it's the primary reason why there are no longer black rat snakes and black racers in the preserve. These are long-lived reptiles that have pretty big home ranges, and the females in particular, because they're dispersing to lay eggs, are pretty vulnerable to roadkill. And we think it's actually a road density that ended up causing the extirpation of both of those snakes in the preserve. That's an issue. And as Steve said, we've seen DEC was radio tracking spotted turtles in the preserve, and we know that some turtles make it across Route 155, and unfortunately some do not.
Well, currently we don't really have. There's only a couple possible places where they can cross under, not the throughway, but
Right.
a couple roads that do have some tunnels, but we haven't monitored them at all to see if they're even being used.
No, the only other study that's been done in the preserve with that is Scott LaPointe's work with Dr. Roland Kays and Fisher. And Fishers were readily using even the narrowest culvert to go under Route 155 instead of going over it. So they set up wildlife cameras on either end of the culverts, and we're pretty amazed to see Fishers using some of those features to avoid traffic.
Ooh, all right, I got another fun picture. So Susan sent me another picture. So Susan sent me this guy, which she was curious. And by the way, Susan, it doesn't bother me at all. This is one of my favorite games, is to what's that picture? So she was wondering, what's the likelihood of discovering a new species versus just an unusual form of a known species? I spotted two of these guys on different visits to the Truax Trail last July, maybe the same individual twice. As much as I'd like to hope it's a new species, I suppose it's more likely to be a known species. It looks to me like Acadian banded or Edwards hair streak that forgot some of its spots. So yeah, Susan, I agree with your assessment there. I believe that, yes, this is most likely, and you can tell this individual looks a little bit old. So its hind wings and the edges of its wings look a little tattered. It should have two of these tails, and the tails kind of look a little beat up and weak. It just looks like it's missing some scales on its wings. So I agree that it's definitely a hair streak butterfly. I'm not sure which one. It's really hard when they get old. I sometimes refer to them as crusty at this stage. But yeah, it's definitely more likely that this is just an unusual individual that looks kind of funny because it's older, or, I mean, you can get aberrant like color morphs of different things. So I actually have seen two yellow lupins, and we've seen birds that are what we call leucistic, which are lacking the pigment, I think, in some parts of their bodies. So they'll have like some white feathers on their face or on their rump, and then the rest will be normally colored. You can also get birds that are affected by, they have like yellows and oranges in birds are frequently determined by the food that they're eating, like carotenoids, I think. So they've actually found that like northern flickers, there's a western variety and an eastern variety. Ours is the yellow shafted flicker in the eastern United States, and in the western United States it's red shafted. And for a while they were seeing orange sherbet flickers, and they weren't sure if these were hybrids or what was going on with these flickers. And it turned out that they were eating honeysuckle berries, and it was actually changing the color of the shafts of their feathers and making them more kind of orange colored instead of either red or yellow. So they weren't really hybrids. It was just totally diet related. So you can get weird color morphs of common species also that can happen. But in this case, I think, what's that?
Hognoses too. We have several different color morphs of hognose, from jet black to real beautifully modeled yellow and brown.
Yeah, I've seen a white one too. only once.
The preserve?
Yeah, it was a small one. It was over in Blueberry Hill. It was the lightest one I've ever seen.
Denise has started a new game.
Bugs don't count. What? What's the coolest animal in the pine bush? And what's the scariest? Bugs don't count. Psh. Yeah, that's because they're all awesome.
No,
Right,
ticks,
let's-
ticks are the scariest. And they're
Right,
not
survey
bugs.
says, would have to agree with Dr. Campbell on that.
So that's my vote for that. Coolest, I don't know.
I mean, we
Coolest
do have
animal.
bombardier beetles, which basically make they have two chemicals in their abdomen, and when they're threatened, they mix those chemicals together and spray it out their butts, and it's basically boiling hot acid.
That's the coolest and the scariest at the same time.
Yeah, I
when
mean,
they're
that's
in
pretty
your
cool.
face.
That's pretty cool.
Will it burn your skin if they get it on you?
We have to be like very close and like very like direct. And even then, I think it probably is just like a little red mark. I don't think it's horrible for us, but let's see. Wendy had asked earlier what our favorite research projects have been.
I'll go first. I think mine's been we tracked the prairie warbler migration using a cool little bit of technology called geolocators. I can show you a picture.
Do it.
If you guys aren't familiar with them, or if you haven't seen the talk. So this is what the geolocators look like. There's these tiny little things that collect light levels. It's just like a battery, basically a clock, a microprocessor, and a light sensor all integrated together. And we strap these things on, and they just take light readings every 10 minutes. And we can use that information to look at when the sun rises and when the sun sets, and when the sun is the highest in the sky. And you can use that information to get latitude and longitude of these birds on a daily basis, and allowed us to track. Again, these birds only weigh 7.5 to 8 grams. I think that's about the weight of 4 wheat thins. So these are very small birds that we're tracking from their breeding grounds all the way down to their wintering grounds and then back again. We're getting the full annual cycle of their movements. Again, on these very, very small birds, and we're only using light level information. So we're gathering information on individuals' movements. We put those on about 25 birds at the Pine Bush, and also the project, there's about 22 of them put on in Montague Plains Wildlife Management Area. And so we have that, and I'm still working on analyzing that data, but I thought that was like sort of a cool mix of modern technology and ecology.
And I'm going to say the Whippoorwill project, which is very similar, is my favorite at the moment. We're putting GPS tags on whippoorwills and tracking them over the course of the night and over the course of the season. Getting similar data, but seeing some, for the 2 we had last year, we saw some pretty interesting results. One male who appeared to have a female, because we caught her when we recaptured him, stayed within about 15 acres. And the other male potentially didn't have a mate, and he covered, hundreds of acres. He spent a few nights in the preserve, then went up to Fisher's Ferry for a night, and then went directly back down to southern Albany County, down by 5 Rivers for a couple of nights, and then came crazy. Our luck, we should have played the lottery that night. Came back to the preserve on a night we were trying to recatch him, and we got lucky. And when we can almost instantaneously, as soon as we get the backpack off the bird, we can download the data and see where they've been. And it was shocking to see how far and wide he went, but always tended to come back to Carter Brandon's East for a night or two before heading out looking for love and other bits and pieces of open space in Albany County.
Do you want a quick show that map? I can show that map. I have it here if you want to
Yeah,
see
you
it.
have it.
Yeah.
Is it animated?
Oh, Steve's prepared.
It's not animated,
Seriously.
but it's
Okay.
just the overall view of all the movements. Oop. So it's over here on the
While
right.
Steve's pulling that up, I'll just add that catching that female when we were recapturing the male in the Great Dune, that's the first, and she had a full-blown brood patch, so clearly she was sitting on eggs or chicks. That's the first confirmed, that was actually 2 years ago, 2019. I forget. COVID's already, distant memory in my mind. So it was 2 years ago, 2019, and that one that Steve has the cursor on now, when we recaptured him, we also caught a female with a brood patch. And that's the first documented occurrence of confirmation of successful breeding in the pine bush in like 30 years for whippoorwills. They've been gone from this landscape for at least 25 years.
So here was the other one. This was
Yeah,
all
you
one
look at
bird.
that. That was one bird that we initially captured at Carpenter Bee East. Can you show them where KBE is? Right there. And you can see it spent a lot of time in the preserve,
Here and across
but
the street.
also had these crazy forays up to southern Fisher's Ferry and down nearly to Selkirk. Looks like he hung out at a golf course for a night.
Right. We initially even thought they were two birds on opposite sides of 155. It turned out, yeah, to be the same bird all over the place.
And one advantage of having the GPS tags on them is that if we had technology that was more localized, we wouldn't have we would have only known the bird wasn't in the preserve. We wouldn't have known where it actually went. So we're hopefully later this week, early next week, now that whippoorwills are back this year, we'll be out catching some more birds and putting tags on them.
Dylan, your turn.
Oh, I was getting ready for the next question. I've been thinking,
Oh, monkeys. That's a
It's
great
super-
question.
it's super hard. It's super hard for me to pick one because I consider myself a naturalist in that I do kind of like everything. And I definitely was like a backyard birder when I started working at the Pine Bush, and now I would call myself a full-fledged birder. Maybe I would go so far as to say an ornithologist. But I mean, the bees for me it's a lot of work with the bees, and I'll say that, the fact that I have to kill them is not the best, but getting under the scope and finding a new species is always super, super exciting. And the fact that I'm still finding new species is always exciting. So that's pretty rewarding work. And I am really excited to see, we just burned 2 of our sites that we're looking at the bee community in, following a mow treatment and then a burn treatment. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to find out there after burning these. So I think that's going to be really cool. Steve, I think there was a good one for you. Did you see Susan's question?
Yeah, I just saw that.
So Susan says, I was told that there's a method for counting the butterflies of various species in the preserve that involves a lot of juicy statistics and walking along with a long pole, and that you could give me all the details. What is the process and how does it work?
Can I find a visual on that that'll explain it easier? Can we circle back? I'll pull up a graphic for that.
Sure. Neil, do you want to talk about the owls with the sounding like monkey?
Monkey birds. That's awesome. I love that. So those are barred owls, and it's usually branching, right? It's the branching juveniles that frequently make the monkey call. But also the adults would do it because they say, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" And they'll go, laughing. It's maniacally loud. They do sound like monkeys in the trees, I gotta say. But I bet it's barred owls. I'm not sure exactly why they do that.
I think it is territorial. I think they get really, that's like when they get real PO'd.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I've
the
had
juveniles.
a group of them doing it in the middle of the day once in the preserve, and I was kind of shocked that they were going crazy like that. So maybe it is territorial. Note to self, I'm going to look that up. I should know that answer.
The juveniles make a horrible screeching sound that sounds like death. So I want to say that it's probably like adults getting too close to each other or something that causes those. Yeah, it does. It sounds exactly like a monkey. I agree. Are you ready, Steve?
Sure, I'll try to do this off the cuff and not drone on too much about statistics, but
that's what she wanted, man.
I know she did say juicy, which I find is an interesting.
All right, doctor. Wow us with
interesting use of the adjective for statistics, but so we use a method known as, as distance sampling. And so with distance sampling, it's there's transects. Each of these areas in blue are the areas that we actually survey. These green areas are actually all the areas we've restored. So we're really only surveying just a portion of the restored areas that have been restored and planted with lupin. But if you zoom in on each of these sites, they're covered with a series of transects. And our field techs walk along those transects and they count the butterflies they see and they look at the distance from the transects, which gives you, they basically put them in these different distance intervals. And the reason why they do that is it's all about trying to estimate how many butterflies we're actually seeing, of what proportion of butterflies we're seeing of those that are actually out there. So it's all about estimating detection probability. And so for example, if we walk the transects and we get some raw counts, like I said, when we know we walk those, we know we're not estimating all the butterflies that are actually out there. We're missing some proportion of them. And so we use that information in those distances to figure out what proportion that we missed. So for example, if you walk out and we count 50 butterflies in a given survey, and we know that we've only saw half of them, then we know that our estimate is that there's actually 100 out there. So that's sort of the gist of what we do for getting from the raw counts to the actual number of butterflies that are actually out there. And so this shows you here how we go from the raw counts to the actual abundance estimates of those sites. And we do that by, like, here's a graphic. If we could see 100% of the butterflies 4 meters from the line, then the number that you counted here, 4 in the first bin, 4 in the second bin, there's going to be, we saw 16 butterflies, we saw 100% of them, so there's 16 butterflies. Now imagine a scenario where we only say we saw them at 2 meters out and then none after. So we only saw 8, but we know that if we saw 50% of the butterflies out there, then we know that there's 16 out there, and so on, as you expect. The butterflies we make the assumption that butterflies are evenly distributed through the area. The only thing that changes is our ability to detect them with distances. So this bluish area shows you how our ability to detect them drops off. So this is obviously sort of a Mickey Mouse example. This here is an example of real data. We create a histogram of the number of butterflies we see in the different distances. We fit a detection function to that. The area under the curve gives us a proportion that we've counted, and up here is the number that we missed. And this gives us an estimate of our detection probability. We do that using different software programs. I used to use Program Distance. Now I use a different program. But that gets us from here to here. And then what I do is I come in and I fit a brood, an insect population curve to those. Because remember, brood size is the number of butterflies that emerge over this entire period. Butterflies emerge and they only live for about 3 to 5 days. So the population's constantly turning over from when we start surveying, so when they start flying, to when they stop flying a month or so later. So we have to try to account for how many butterflies have basically emerged and then died throughout this entire period. So that's what this insect population curve does. We fit those to our abundances. And there's parameters that control the shape of this curve. One of them is brood size, which we're particularly interested in. So the best fitting curve then gives us an estimate of our best estimate of brood size. And here's the math if you want to see that it actually fits that. And I do that using Bayesian methods. So that was sort of a quick and dirty how we go about.
You said there was math there? I missed that.
Yeah, I didn't. That's my obligatory. Yeah, you can see there's lots of stuff that goes in that I don't do that myself. I program it into the computer and the computer does it for me.
A lot of Greek symbols in there.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Haley says, are there cicadas at the preserve? If so, what types? So yes, there are cicadas at the preserve. And there are many more. I grew up in like central New York. And I basically had kind of maybe 1 or 2, the summer dog cicada and a swamp cicada. And there are more species of cicadas in the pine bush. One that I found, the exuvia or the shed skin. So they spend actually most of their lives underground. And then they crawl out in the summer, and you can find their little shells or their shed skins on the sides of trees where they shed their skin, and then one more time, and then their wings expand. And that's when they do that buzzing sound. And so I found one that was a hieroglyphic cicada, I believe. So there's a few species. I'm not exactly sure how many, but we do not have any of the periodical cicadas in the pine bush. I know there is a brood that's coming out in it's actually out, I think, south of us in more central. Well, it's like Pennsylvania out to
Mid-Atlantic?
Ohio, I think. Yeah, mid-Atlantic maybe is the right term. And it used to be in New York, but only down on Long Island. And I'm pretty sure that the last time that periodical cicada came out, there wasn't very many of them. So they kind of think they were going extinct down there. So all the cicadas that we do have are standard 1 year kind of cicadas. So probably summer dogs, swamp cicadas, hieroglyphic cicadas. And yeah, I want to say there's probably like 8 to 10 species of cicadas in the pine bush,
So
which you can identify. What's that?
Can you interpret their hieroglyphics? Why are they called hieroglyphic?
They are actually, I think it's because their exuvia has a lot of like pigment on it. So maybe, I don't know, maybe because most of them, the pigment's just a plain brown. The hieroglyphics is like, actually the adult has like a very patterned thorax that maybe looks like it has hieroglyphics on it.
Looks like Denise has another question about fire.
Yeah, go for it, Neil. So
It's a hot topic.
I can read it. So in Carter Barron's East, the portion, oh, sorry. No. She said,
Back to Burns. Yeah.
Back to Burns. If you don't mind, if they are fascinating, how often does a given spot get burned, and are some burned more than others?
So second part first, yes, some are definitely burned more than others, and it really depends on the community we're trying to manage, maintain, or the community we're trying to restore. So our fire program is kind of broken up into 2 phases. There's a restoration phase. That's where we're going in and burning sites as frequently as we can to try and reset the ecological stage and restore the site back to what it was historically. And other sites, like the 2 we burned this week, one is the site behind my head there and then that background, Alley Cat. And the other one is Bivy in Carter Barron's West. Those were, I hate to use the term restored because restoration is a process, not an event. I don't know that I would ever look at a site and go, it's fully restored, because there's all kinds of nutrient cycling and animal plant population dynamics, all kinds of things going on. But anyway, a maintenance burn like the 2 that we did today and yesterday, those spots will get burned on average about once every 3 to 5 years. And it also depends on the type of ecological community. So we have the successional northern sandplain grasslands, like the area outside the Discovery Center, and those grassland sites would get burned more frequently, probably once every 2 or 3 years, if we wanted to keep them as grassland. High quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens in the maintenance phase, again, those are like anywhere from 3 to 7. Really, the average is around 5 years that we would hit a given spot with fire. And then there's pitch pine oak. Oh, thank you. Who did that, Steve? Magic. Where we go? Yep. So then we've got pitch pine scrub oak thickets, which are kind of overgrown barrens where we lose all of those gaps between the scrub oak, which is where the grasses and the lupins live. And pitch pine scrub oak thickets, those could get burned once every 10 to 15 years and maintain that kind of condition. And the pitch pine oak forest, those would get burned, once every 20 years if we wanted to maintain sites as that ecological community. But we can also, in the restoration phase, by increasing the frequency or changing the timing of when we burn to increase the severity, it is possible to turn with fire pitch pine oak forest back to thickets, or thickets back to barrens, by burning more frequently, or burning more to get a more severe fire like in the growing season. One of the things that we do with fire, it's not all fires are not created equal. We're not really fire managers as much as we're fire effects managers. If you think about it, right, these plants have an annual physiological cycle. So right now things are leafing out and their roots are kind of depleted because they're taking all that energy and using it to put on the new leaves and that initial burst of new growth. So the plants are actually at their weakest. So you can have a pretty mild fire and have a pretty big ecological impact if you hit plants in the growing season versus hitting them in the dormant season when, basically all of their reserves are stored and put away in the roots. But yes, so we do burn sites on different frequencies depending on whether or not they're in the restoration phase or the maintenance phase, and depending on the type of ecological community we're looking to maintain.
Awesome. Susan, Yes, there is a brood of the periodical that comes out just south of us. And that was, I think the last time they were out was 2013. I just checked because I took photos because it was amazing. So they're a 17-year. So I think I went south until I found them, and I found them at the Lewis Swire Preserve, which I believe is a TNC property on the Hudson. South, like Castleton on Hudson area, maybe.
Are those the same species that are out now in the mid-Atlantic, just a different brood, or is it a different species?
Yeah. Yes, I believe there are 3 species of the periodical cicadas. And their genus is Cicada, so they're magic cicadas. I don't know who named them, but it's awesome. So yeah, they are the same species. They just have this different timing in their emergence. So they should come out again in 2030. Don't have long to wait now. Neil, I think we got another one for you. So Scott and Denise said, in Connor Barrens East, the portion of the Blue Trail that parallels Route 155, there is a camera-like object on about a 4-foot pole, and in the direction it is pointing, a taller pole, maybe 100 feet away. So maybe we can split this.
Oh,
can you please explain what this is and what you're studying with it?
Yes. So there's a couple of things going on there, Denise. So the taller skinny pole is one of the CTT nodes for tracking birds, and I'll let Dylan talk about that because that's her project. But it's very cool new tech that we've installed. But the camera is actually not so much research as much as it's actually it's a filming opportunity. So the Smithsonian is working with the BBC and the New York State DEC to make a feature film on wildlife of the Hudson Valley. So looking at different species of wildlife and different habitats from Lake Tier of the Clouds in the Adirondacks all the way down to Manhattan and Long Island Sound. So they've covered moose in the Adirondacks, beaver, otters, bald eagles. I know they're covering osprey. So the Corner Blue, being that we're in the Hudson Valley, is going to be featured in this film. So those cameras, there's actually 2 of them in the preserve, but that camera is a real sweet high def time lapse camera that's taking a picture once every 10 minutes to capture the bloom of lupin. So they put them out before lupin really was starting to bloom, and it's going to capture the bloom of lupin over the course of a 3-week window or so. And there's actually another one in the preserve in one of our research sites that we burned yesterday. So there it was capturing the lupin bloom, but also the fire, and then the regreening and the reblooming of lupin following that fire. So that should be a pretty cool time lapse. The other thing so the name of this company is very cool. The name of the company is Cosmo Vision. I don't know if that's who's doing the filming for the Smithsonian. Sorry, Wendy. But they're also using high definition drone cameras. So they came and got a bunch of footage of fire, both with video cameras, digital video cameras on the ground, but also from a drone. And one of the other things they're doing is creating drone time lapse. So they're flying over some of these sites, including the site that we burned yesterday. So we can pre-program a flight for this thing that will come back every week and redo. And it will create an aerial time lapse as well. So it's what we hear, the Carner and our fire management and the Pine Bush is going to feature fairly prominently in this film, which will hopefully be out the latter part of next year. Dylan, do you want to talk about the CTT nodes? That's the tall, skinny pole that Denise was referring to.
Yeah. So there's actually 33 of those out in the preserve, and they're about 8-foot tall conduit poles with what looks like a little box on top that has a little antenna on the side. So those are nodes that are communicating with each other and with a tower on the roof of the Discovery Center using cellular data. somehow magically. And it's basically, we're doing radio telemetry. So back in the day when we would put radio tags on an animal, we'd go out with a Yagi antenna and a receiver, and we'd go and we'd point this antenna and try to find and locate the animal. And usually you would have to take multiple points around the animal to try and get a compass bearing to try and pinpoint where that animal was. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of person hours to do it. And you don't get a lot of points when you do it. And it's not super accurate. So we've been trying different technologies to follow animals, namely birds. One of them Steve mentioned was the geolocators. Neil mentioned GPS tags. Those are great, except they have batteries in them. So you're limited by the life of the battery, and you're limited by the size animal you can put them on, because batteries we can only make so small now. So what this system does is instead of having to go out with Yagi antenna and follow these things around, each one of these nodes will detect a tagged animal. And if an animal is detected by multiple nodes, then you can pinpoint where the animal is, and they'll take as many points as they can, like when the animal is in range. And so we're going to be putting little tiny tags. They don't have batteries in them. They just have solar panels. They have tiny solar panels on them. And so they will communicate with these nodes. We're going to put them on eastern toe east to start. And then we're going to get some really great, very local scale information about how those animals are using the habitat during the breeding season. And it's all automated. So all of that information from the birds is going to get communicated back to our MODIS tower, which is connected to a computer at the Discovery Center that we can go and download all that data. So that is what that is. We're piloting it this year. And I think we're piloting it for the technology a little bit because we have quite a bit of topography to deal with. So it'll be interesting to see if how our node system works with all the topography at the Pine Bush.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Just the coolest part of that project for me is that when you're following an animal around with a Yagi antenna, you're kind of constantly influencing and disturbing the animal you're trying to study. So by doing it this way with these nodes, there's a disruption to the animal's behavior when we tag them. But after that, we never have to catch the animal again. We don't have to go out there and follow them around and harass them constantly. So we should be able to get some really great data about their usage of habitat. And again, all of that is the breeding season stuff is really tying it back to management, trying to understand how our management is influencing the habitat for species like towhees, prairie warblers, whippoorwills. We're hoping that this technology will allow us to not only follow birds, but I've already had inquiries from other researchers. Chris Collins, who studies small mammals, he's down at Hartwick. He's he's like, can I put CTT tags on small mammals?
Oh.
Use your network? And I said, maybe. But it's got a lot of potential uses and should hopefully give us some really phenomenal data.
I would say if this project, if it actually works, then this would be the coolest project for me knowing that we have in the preserve. And we could be overwhelmed with data. I worry that if we could have hundreds, if not thousands of points for some of these birds, which then that becomes its own. That's not a bad problem to have too much data, but it does then present its own issues of trying to manage it and make sense of all of that.
Which job security, my friend. It
is. It's a nice problem to have, and I'm looking forward to it. But it should be able to give us sort of unprecedented levels of information on how they're using their habitat, which, like Dylan was saying before you might, on some of these smaller birds, you could maybe put the transmitters on for 2 weeks, as all the batteries would last on something like the size of a hermit thrush. And so, how many times can you triangulate a point in 2 weeks?
And some of the demos that we've seen of how this technology has been used. One was looking at scrub jays live in family groups or pods. So looking at, whole groups of pods and seeing how their ranges overlap a little bit, depending on who was related to whom. And the other one was looking at, I think it was snowy owls or some sort of a raptor, but they could see when the bird was resting and when the bird was actually hunting and catching things and create these 3D models. It was really some pretty incredible data to be able to see, but especially for us to know how the birds are using the habitat. In particular, are there places that they're avoiding for some reason? just the potential of this technology is pretty amazing.
Oh, if I can just add to that too, Neil, Neil and Dylan, a thought that I had is I'd be really interested in putting these on the towhees in the neighbors. I'd really like to see how their territory boundaries are defined when they're right next to each other. We tend to draw them on a map as being like, here's the point, this territory is here, this territory is here, when maybe in reality they're bleeding over a little bit, and maybe the territory boundary shifts. And that's sort of information we can get if we have hundreds of points of where these birds are occurring, to see how much
Let's do that.
intrude on each other's territory. So I'd like to make sure, as we're putting these things out there, I'd like to put them on birds that are nearby to see sort of how those territory boundaries play out.
It's going to be awesome.
Hopefully.
That is, as long as the nodes, like, so we had to bring one in because it wasn't getting a GPS fix, and we took it down, and it was like, it had a lot of bird poop on it for only having been deployed for like a week and a half. There was a lot of bird poop on that thing. So as long as the birds don't sit on them and poop all over them and obscure the solar panels, it should be good. All right. I think we were supposed to end at 7:30. Correct me if I'm wrong, Wendy. But I did want to say that Susan had an interesting suggestion, which I really like. She said it would be nice to have this information about which sites have been burned and when easily available to the public, either on the website or at the Discovery Center. I've been fascinated to walk around the various trails in the past month and see how quickly the plants grow back, but I'd love to be able to know which places were burned 1, 5, 10 years ago and see how they look now. So that's
that would actually be pretty easy to do, to create a static map of the most recent burn with management units and the trail system.
Have that. We would just have to make it available.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's a great idea.
On that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We will be on again next Tuesday at 6:30. So if you see anything in the preserve, or, if you think of anything, you can shoot us an email. You can use the form site link to submit a question, or we can do it all off the cuff like we did tonight. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Bye now.